Hello and welcome to CII's webinar, The Next Normal, Executing with Confidence When You Are Betting the Business. We appreciate you taking the time to join us. This webinar focuses on how to use scenario planning to improve your odds of successfully managing project transitions and how this is being used in the current COVID-19 economic environment. Some general information about the webinar. This is being recorded, so we'll keep everybody on mute. The material will be available on our blog page, which you see on the screen. On your control panel, you'll see a section called Questions. Please feel free to enter your questions there, and we'll address them as we go and at the end of the webinar. I'm Mike Pappas, CII's Associate Director for Deployment. With us today, we have Gerry, Sepe, and Mark Triesch from EPM. Gerry, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's on the call. So by means of introduction of the company, I want to let you know that EPM is a consulting company that specializes in the organizations that build capital projects and programs. Our practice is based on Stanford University research that asked the question, if we've got great people and great tools, why do we still miss our objectives? Some of the research will be reflected in our talk today. Our company has been in existence for 20 years. We've provided consulting services that improve predictability, performance, and profits on over $200 billion of capital projects. We've done this on every continent in the world. And EPM has been a CII member for 10 years. The purpose of the talk today is to help you improve your restart by using the information and tools we'll provide and prepare you for the next normal. We think that there's a return from COVID-19 and people are going to get restarted, but there'll be many next normals will occur over the course of the next years. So this is information that is important to use beyond just a post-pandemic reality that we're now working through. The information is also scalable. It relates to several levels. So you and your own scope will find it useful in a department that you work in the project that you're working on, and in your business. So you'll be able to apply this in various settings. And we want to show you some ways to approach those things that you can control or at least influence, because the next normal, you will have to behave differently to deal with all the rapidly changing conditions. Plan the work and work the plan will be partially helpful at best, but at worst may be the wrong approach. We want to explore ideas around hidden work, rework, coordination needs, and the time it takes to get the many decisions needed on your projects done. We'll use 5 areas of project integration to look at what really impacts project performance. This is often seen as the soft stuff, but it affects your projects in a real way, and you can use this to help drive positive outcomes. Before we get into the meat of the talk, I want to distinguish 2 concepts first. One is transitions, and the other is hidden work. Then Mark Triesch will discuss scenario planning with you. Next normal, restart, getting back to work. These are all ways of referring to a transition. Important transitions in project developments might be a transition to execution or transition to startup and commissioning. Those are transitions that we're likely familiar with. Why is the term transition important? Why do we want to distinguish it? Well, it's because transitions are the riskiest part of a project. They are complex, unpredictable, and unstable. They're not so much about gaining momentum as starting over. They generate new work fronts, many handoffs, and a lot of coordination. So they come with great risk, but transitions also represent opportunities to increase coordinated action, gain momentum, and create competitive advantage. We'll talk about scenario planning later in the talk and how the planning process can build leadership and team alignment, confidence during the execution that drives productivity and safe operations. Because prior work is unfinished and new work for an uncertain future is underprepared, kind of by definition, transitions have a bow wave of work at a time when the organization is usually at a weak point and understaffed. Funding may not have been released as yet. Spots in the organization chart are likely unfilled. People behave in the old reality because they haven't learned the behaviors for the new reality. I'd like to tell you a story about from our experience, our consulting experience. It's about an investment among multiple owners using contracted joint ventures. They were readying for execution phase for some time, but due to the size of the capital commitment, investors were very cautious. Finally, when funding was approved, there was a mad dash for getting into execution. Unfortunately, many of the systems, processes, and people were underdeveloped, and leadership communication channels, decision-making processes, and controls were being pressure tested on site. 5 months delay and an estimated 26% over budget condition were attributed to this delay in the transition into execution. So let me just nail down this point. Transitions are complex operations where coordination is critical, demands clear capabilities and intention, requires many handoffs, especially where exchanges cross custody boundaries. There's a bow wave of work while the organization is at a low point. Because of heavy coordination loads during transitions, it dominates organizational activities. But it's an opportunity for the team to focus and accelerate the pace. An organization is often expecting one outcome, but they are getting another if they're not ready for the next normal. Okay, hidden work. What do we mean by hidden work? Hidden work is work, but we seem to think of it differently because it's challenging to measure, easy to overlook. There are 4 components to the work. One is the direct work itself, value creation. You see that reflected in the green section of the bar. That's what we do when we are having pipe welding go on. That's direct work. Then there's the 3 components of hidden work: coordination, getting the right information and materials to that welder. That's shown in orange here. The second component of hidden work is rework. It's for changes in information, specifications, or even redoing the physical work, shown in yellow. And the last part of hidden work is the one that's really important for our focus. It's decision weight. We need to go after that hammer and tongue every chance you get. It's where a person or people need to make a decision before the work can proceed, but if it's delayed, so is the work. That's the part that's shown in red. As you can see, hidden work takes the skills and attention of the team just the same as direct work. It can be measured in work hours just the same as direct work. And as we see the illustration, hidden work often is equal to or even exceeds the direct work. During transitions, this is important, the hidden work increases, especially the coordination and decision-making, and that's often larger than the direct work. This is an organizational drag where you sense, this is where you sense pressure in transitions. This is the reason why you feel that. A handy way to think about this is, let's look at advanced work packaging. AWP is intended to reduce rework and decision weight, but we all know that early coordination demands can be very high. That's why we use CAD models and schedules to get shared mental models and increase the coordination across the discipline. However, if the future is difficult to plan for, like it is in the next normal, then early work is underinvested. The facility I just spoke about faced such a circumstance. They had underestimated the hidden work in their transition to execution by a factor of 8. Now we're going to move to the talk over to Mark, who will cover scenario planning. But first, Mike Pappas will help us ask a question about scenario planning.
Hi, so we have a poll question here that we're going to use. And as you see on the screen, when I put the poll up, if you can't select an answer, minimize that window or downsize it. If that poll window is full screen, you won't be able to select an answer. So here's the poll. As part of my organization's preparation for post-COVID-19 business, I have taken part in scenario planning. We'll see what you all say. We'll give you a couple of more seconds. Okay, here are the results.
Okay. Thank you for that, everybody. That's some interesting stuff that we're looking at here. After I'm done talking about scenario planning, we will see if we still have 52% agreeing that they participated in scenario planning, or maybe they were not clear that it was scenario planning. They might be in there with that 22% that says maybe or not sure, or what do you mean by scenario planning? So I'm going to explain what we mean by scenario planning, and we're just going to go there right now. Mike, do I have control back for the slide?
Yes, you do.
Okay. So scenario planning, first of all, you know, I'd like to distinguish the term scenario planning from what we normally do in our project planning. And that's usually forecast planning and results in trying to project one future for a set of known conditions and allowing for variation because of unknowns. So you can see the drawing over there on the right. Scenario planning, by contrast, actually starts with various futures in mind, and it works backward toward the present and tries to build in some flexible choices along the way. So this shows us what uncertainties we may have to consider in order to accommodate the most possible favorable futures. So really, scenario planning is all about resistance. So how does scenario planning help address hidden work, which Gerry defined a little bit earlier? In our early slides, we said the soft stuff is hard, and that really hidden work is part of the soft stuff. It's hard to quantify. And so these scenarios in scenario planning create an explicit plan for soft stuff like communications and decision making. They also cross organizational boundaries. You absolutely must go outside the silos that you typically plan within to identify driving forces and critical uncertainties. Scenario planning results in creating shared mental models, but like written plans or models are something that can be pointed to, and it isn't just between someone's ears. The difference of a shared mental model like P6 or a drawing like Gerry was referring to earlier, it's more about how the team will accomplish those things in the face of changing conditions than the manifestation of what gets built or a P6 schedule. We also, in scenario planning, we have biases toward what we can see and what we can execute on. So we don't usually do scenario planning. We don't want to waste our time on planning for things that might never occur. So we frequently let ourselves off the hook in the short term, and then we pay for it later. So scenario planning is really systems thinking. A proper scenario planning mindset has me asking myself, what could potentially prevent me from delivering this asset and delivering the value for the company? That's not just about doing your job, it's about delivering the asset for the company. So this thinking shouldn't be within your boundaries, but outside and across boundaries. And if you're not asking that question and addressing it every day, then you're really not doing what your job is going to demand of you in the next normal. And it's different than executing a plan. It's harder because it's more fluid and it's more open, and it takes a shift in mindset. So let's take an example to show how we might do some scenario planning. We'll use this petrochemical plant, and these sorts of conditions are in place due to COVID-19 restrictions. I don't need to read them to you. You're all capable of doing that. But let's say this is what is in place today, but we're considering going back to work. So what kind of conditions might we need to plan for in the next normal for our post-COVID-19 project reality? I'd like you to consider some real-time issues we've been hearing about as people plan to restart their projects. For example, cleaning, bathrooms, buses, parking, added social distancing steps to work processes, changed legal conditions, new union rules, new accounting and timekeeping policies. One told us about the main mechanical contractor lost 60% of their workforce because they went to other jobs. Government staff that does permitting has been furloughed, so some can't access the records that are necessary to approve permits. The project management office has split into work from home and site-based personnel. Decision authority has changed and wet signatures are no longer possible in some cases. Meetings are now challenged by incompatible video conferencing technologies. Email and information exchange systems now require integration because of remote work. And at the extreme end, bankruptcy is possible for several vendors. Merger and acquisition activity has increased or stalled, and second wave COVID-19 has been predicted and probably should be planned for. Now, if some or all of this sounds familiar to you, you understand how you'll have to plan for multiple scenarios because you're not sure what things are going to show up, if some of these things are going to affect your job or not. So for the sake of illustrating an example, I'm just going to choose one of the many conditions I mentioned. This is also an important action for scenario planning, to lay out possibilities and then set some priorities. As we know from project work, urgent doesn't always equal important. For our discussion, let's use the project management office has split to work from home and site-based personnel. That's what we'll go ahead and use in our scenario to plan. But first, I want to talk about a method through which we should consider each scenario. So we're going to take a moment here and step through the 5 elements of project integration. Gerry mentioned this briefly during his introduction, and we should follow up here on the story of the Stanford University. About 3 decades ago, Professor Ray Levitt of Stanford set out to discover the answer to a construction industry riddle. The riddle was, with all the planning, scheduling, budgets, and smart, experienced people we put onto capital projects, why do they fail? Why do we miss our objectives? And, everyone's got an answer to that. Projects are complex, but subsequent research from Stanford and other universities led to the development of 5 project integration elements that are shown to be the best predictor of project failure and consequently of project success. So the secret is how well the team is positioned to perform this work. Crudely put, it's the organization, stupid. Now, this is hardly a revelation. We all know the best teams develop the best plans and perform the best work. So CII's findings support this information, and EPM's consulting experience supports this, and your personal experience probably supports this, but there's a bit more to it. These are called integration elements because it's how they fit together that matters. So I want to walk through all 5. If we look at this sort of diagram on the left there, we see some bars that describe work, and we always start with the work. And the work processes, so that's both scope and method, including the hidden work. And that's hard to estimate, so we'll talk a little bit about that later. But can we describe what it is we're trying to do, what we have set out to accomplish? And then second, we consider the organization or team and how it could be specifically designed to fit that work. There's no one right organization, but there are better organizations to do that work in that way. And sometimes you have to work with what you have. So this team and individual skills and experience are extremely important. In fact, a recent McKinsey poll placed rethinking the organization as one of the highest post-COVID-19 priorities for all the poll respondents. So the third item, look at the leadership and governance and decision models for the team. So successful projects handle decisions well, and there are millions of those to be made on a capital project. Fourth, Communication and information flow. This is more than just meetings and announcements and the things you usually see going around on a project, bulletin boards. Tools and people should be chosen after careful consideration. Most of the time, these things look like an afterthought and are left up to functional organizations. And those functional organizations, procurement, project controls, engineering, they're kind of told, okay, handle the integration, handle moving the information, or talk to IT people. So that integration is usually not very good, and more demands are going to be placed on it post-COVID-19. Lastly, number 5, and not least, the ever-changing business risk environment. So shifts in this environment cause shifts in the previous 4. Integration, that challenge is dynamic. It's never standing still. These 5 elements are foundational for all scenario planning. They should be addressed in preparation for each project transition, which Gerry talked about earlier, from feed to execution, bulks to systems, systems through startup and commissioning. You see this everywhere, bulk material installation to systems completion, and all the way to sustained operation. And each time, all 5 of these should be looked at. So we're going to apply this 5PI model we just talked our way through to a chemical plant scenario planning example. So remember, we've just taken one element of the scenario plan that we talked about earlier, and that was project management offices split to work from home and site-based work. So we're investigating the implications of that and see if we can use our 5PI lens to see where we might be exposed to additional risk. Usually that risk shows up in the form of hidden work, but the work and work processes sometimes change as well. So if we look at that, we ask ourselves, what work processes must be changed? And just an example might be, well, let's look at the RFI and routing of field status and changes, because that drives cash, that drives our ability to keep up with change, that drives our demand for craft labor and everything else. So you want to get those work processes worked out. We then look at the organization itself and try to find the pitfalls in the team availability or capability. While people might be productive because they don't have this daily commute anymore if they're working from home, their hours still have to match other team members they're working with, and therefore rotation schedules and other things like that for decisions, for meetings and things really need to be carefully reconsidered. The next is a leadership structure. I think everybody knows that when you go from an engineering office to the field, the leadership structure has this sort of power shift as people stay closer to the work. So they change when a person in charge rarely shows up on the job site. We saw this pre-COVID-19, and you have to put escalation and delegation and decision models in place to support your physical distribution. And companies that work in remote areas like offshore oil drilling and mining have proven methods for handling this, and they're a good place to go to see what they do to keep up with that. Information flow under post-COVID-19 is going to be different. It just is. The soft stuff is hard, and it's difficult to know if you're doing enough. It's really hard to know if you are putting the right calories into this. If you think you're going to try and make old methods and technologies work with just a little tweaking, you're probably going to fail. So remember, coordination demands likely double in the short term during transitions. You're going to need a written plan, and you're going to need input from the team. They're going to be patient as long as it gets visibly better over time, but they're going to lose their patience if they don't see it increasing. Last, as I said earlier, the risk environment is not standing still. So whatever you plan for is going to be different by the time you show up. You can't think of everything ahead of time. So how do you allow more time, more flexibility, and more capacity when money is tight? And then you might even think, we're going to compound the risk, like put a second transition on the back of the first one. Let's say this chemical plant that I pointed out has demobilized, as it was described in the scenario, and we have to go back, not only remobilize, we have to complete some bulks installation, but we have to transition our team to completion, startup, commissioning, and handover to the client. So you have a double transition, one on back of the other, and the risk profile goes way up, and typically the schedule goes way out because you have a lot of things trying to take the same space. And remember, the hidden work is revealing itself during those times because coordination load is so heavy. Okay, so I've talked my way through making scenario planning work. You understand a little bit about looking at a single component of scenario planning and applying the 5 PI to it and seeing if it's going to reveal the hidden work for you and give you some places to work on it. But how do you manifest that? How do you get your team to rally around something where they are able to do scenario planning together? So we're just going to take a brief moment to talk about effective scenario planning meetings.
Mark, I think Mike has a question for you.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got a couple questions here for you, Mark. One, Imad says, do you see the new normal coming fast, and how will it be defined?
Yeah, that's a great question, Imad. The new normal is going to come disruptively. We're going to think we have it, and we say, oh, this is the new normal, and then something's going to change. And so when the fact that when you feel like you've gotten into the next normal, that's when things start to get stability. And you actually will see things like these 5 PI demands start to even out. You'll be able to see that the work and work processes are not required to be changed so they can accommodate this next normal, that the organization and team can be a little more stable. They know where they have to show up. They know if they're working from home or they're coming back from working from home. The governance models are able to deal with things, and they're not in emergency mode anymore. There are less emergency meetings and things like that. So it will become more predictable and more stable. Gerry, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I would say that all of the things that you said, and then you're facing further phase shifts. You know, the work that you're doing on a project is advancing, so that it becomes yet, you know, a project is an ever evolving entity, so you're always facing these changes. And I think Mike has another question.
I do.
Please,
what is the role of innovation in such scenario considerations?
Well, that's a great question, because if you plan to do things in the way that you used to do them, you're probably not going to be competitive. So the chance of when a work process must be changed, that gives you an opportunity to innovate. And I'll give a great example of how innovation took place in a very simple thing. Years ago, we used to do time cards on paper and turn them in. And then at some point, Excel or Lotus 123 showed up, and we started to do time cards there. And we said, wow, look how great it is. We can copy them over, we can check our arithmetic, et cetera. But in a way, that was just automating waste. It took a hand process and it made it a little faster. And those cards, those Excel spreadsheets got individually turned in at businesses. And then there was enough disruption, enough capability where people said, wait a second, we should just have a system for this that's in one place, everybody logs onto, and they do it all, and we can close and clear that information in a matter of hours instead of days. That's the place for innovation in the next normal. You're seeing that some things are just broken and they don't work. So here's an opportunity to reinvent the way you address that situation. And you do that by focusing on what the essentials you have to deliver are and see if you can think of a new way to do it. And that's part of the scenario modeling.
Mark, I would like to add something there. Sometimes innovation or disruption comes from our thinking about new normal conditions. Sometimes disruption gets thrust on you. And so here we are working from home. I think this is a great example. And, you know, I think companies have been thinking about working from home, struggling with it, perhaps iteratively trying it, and you're not really moving on it. COVID says, oh no, we're all working from home. So the innovation or the disruption is put on us. I don't think, you know, we're not going to go back to working the way we used to work. You know, financial guys are saying right now, give me a list of when our commercial real estate commitments time out. I mean, right now they're looking at how do we skinny down our real estate. So, you know, you need to you face these realities and then, you know, be able to plan through it. And people are using this disruption to make progress, to use it as an opportunity.
You got more, Mike? These are great questions.
Okay. Yeah, I've just got one more for now. How are scenario planning and management of change related? Are they different activities, or are they part of the same process?
Well, so management of change has a tendency to be a little bit more of a traditional mindset on, remember, I talked about forecast planning, where you have a very clear path of something in the future. And so it's very easy to say, here's what's changed from what that vision of the future is. Now, to be fair, under the next normal with scenario planning, you're going to be choosing some scenarios you're heading toward, and therefore many projects will say, well, you got to use the management of change process. But it is possible that at that time you may re-baseline the job or re-baseline some of your schedule commitments or things like that based on the next normal, and therefore you apply management of change as that sort of traditional process to it. There are some great tools for management of change that can be, I'll say, utilized or implemented in scenario planning, but I see the management of change as more definite. That usually results in either a trend program, an MOC, and then a change to the contract that the customer has to sign. Whereas scenario planning is more fluid, it's less precise, and it usually allows for more emergent outcomes to be explored as you're trying to choose your way to that emergent outcome. Gerry, anything to add?
Nothing to add. Thank you. Good
Okay.
answer.
So then why don't I just go ahead and we're going to talk a little bit about effective scenario planning meetings, and we're just going to hit the high points on this. So if when you take into consideration the things that Gerry and I have discussed, and you say, okay, so how do I use this? We personally think the most direct way is by doing scenario planning meetings, plural, more than one, maybe way more than one before you're ready to head down the road to whatever scenario you think offers the most flexibility and opportunity. So apart from the normal meeting hygiene that we all try to practice, like starting and ending on time and using an agenda, there are some things to do that are key to the success of scenario planning meetings. These things are kind of like risk meetings, but they're much broader. And that's a good mindset in which to engage and start on scenario planning meetings. You need to really get clear on what you're trying to accomplish and the obstacles you need to overcome with the scenario planning. And we talked about a few of those as they related to that chemical plant, what obstacles might need to be overcome. So you got to bring enough information so you can continue to move the conversation, but don't get bogged down looking for things. So you don't need like all the bus data or the messing data or the gate logs or things like that. You want to be moving things along and saying, okay, we'll look for that later to bring color and clarity to the way that we're doing the scenario planning. Next thing, try to bring the stakeholders. We say get the right stakeholders. That's tough. That's a challenge, but you want to bring those stakeholders who can advance the conversation and have a broader view. So you can get specialists to perform studies later or bring in some specific information, but too many folks will really make things slow and unproductive, especially if the meeting is virtual. So the real goal here is getting to the right questions, and that you start with getting the right stakeholders. Because then once you get the questions, engineering construction people are built to solve for X, and that's the important thing, is getting the right questions. So we advocate using some informal exercises to tabletop a workflow. Now that's a word that comes from years where you could physically get together, and you used to just basically pass paper like on a checkout or completions process and say, okay, now Bob signs it, and you'd hand the paper to Bob, and he would say, no, I don't have everything yet. So it's really about sitting around a table and walking through a process or decision, and then trying to see where it might break in the next normal to see if everyone sees it the same way. So you don't want to be too left, right about that. You want to ask questions at every step to see if it's going to break. The next thing is really write things down. Write down what you assume, discuss, and decide, because you're probably going to revisit each one of these decisions several times, and the assumptions and actions, those are going to get lost in the fog of war. And if you can, try to make very rough estimates of time, cost, and effort, or things that might be involved for each of these scenarios. because there is a big pitfall to this, and I'll cover that in a second. So the next thing is try to work your scenario plans and toward action plans or packages that can support what we call a decision maker in a decision support package. So decision makers usually cannot attend all these meetings. They have very high level things to take care of, but they're the person who's going to decide the way the project executes, the way the resources get deployed, et cetera. So you want to be able to put a package together that said, hey, here's what our charter team was able to come up with for scenarios. We find scenario A and B are the best ones with the most options. Here's what we considered. And you really want to be able to lay out your thinking and what you considered. It helps with enrollment, and it also helps that leader, who's usually a hippo, a high income person of power, that to just jump to some conclusion or on a single path, which they might be familiar. So you have to be prepared to lay out your thinking. Now, we also came across some things that we say, you know, these are to be avoided. These are things that are just going to be a problem. And so we have a few pitfalls. And when I was talking about writing things down earlier, you have to avoid trying to be overly precise or doing point estimates. Everywhere you can, be roughly right and fast. Use range estimates. And the planning process is what matters, not the plan that you make. So you shouldn't feel like you have to end up with a P6 schedule at the end of the scenario planning process as a deliverable. You should be able to get roughly right with a number of P6 schedules at level 1 or level 2 that describe what you're going to do, because if you take the time to take it to level 3 or level 4, it's probably too late. The last thing, don't eliminate these scenarios too early. But I do want to stress that there's an urge to do that. The people that do this are used to doing lock down and deliver a project delivery. And so it's an uncomfortable process for people who usually do that. And you have to think about these projects as information problems. You know, the soft stuff is hard. So you want to be flexible and deal with the soft stuff. Gerry, I think it's, I want to say one more thing and then it will be back to you. I want to tell everybody about.
I wanted to interject here for a moment to say, back to that innovation question, you know, with these things to do and what to avoid, in this circumstance, technology has really jumped in and been, so it's not tabletop, it's Zoom top, and it's not, when we're working to socialize things, you know, we have things like Teams and Slack and all these different technologies who are really stepping up to into the gap and putting tools that are useful.
Well, I've been on a couple of webinars where companies like Hexagon have said they feel like they're about 2 years ahead on implementation from where they expected to be, because many of these companies are stepping up. They're stepping up the pace in terms of getting automation technologies implemented. So that's quite a testimonial. Just a brief word from our sponsor. I do want to say, you know, CII has absolutely fantastic resources to help where the soft stuff is hard and to address hidden work. And so you see all the best practices listed here, but let's focus on the ones you can finally probably find the best help regarding restart and the next normal. And so we've kind of picked these out as areas, you'll see them highlighted in bold when you get the deck, that we think there's the most material to help with scenario planning, transitions, and addressing hidden work. So if you want to get started on something specific though, a couple of research team publications actually jump out for us. The first is RT280 for probabilistic risk management in design and construction projects. That's a 2012 team, and that's worth looking at. The second is the fairly recent RT333 for managing commissioning and construction startup transitions. This is directly in the transition space. That's a 2017 team. And if you go back to that example where I was talking about remobilizing to a chemical plant website and then getting ready to do completion, startup, and commissioning, this has a lot of stuff to help with that scenario planning and thinking about it. But I also have some cautions here. So lastly, RT291 on improving the predictability of accurate project outcomes. This takes on the conversation of predictability, and it still applies very well even under the post-pandemic next normal, especially in these very uncertain times, there's a lot to be taken from the predictability and how to become more predictable. So I do want to give you a caveat about this stuff, though. With these best practices or research, tools, and checklists, those things will help you see if you left anything out in your scenario planning. But remember, these checklists are built to support you inside the project delivery system. You know, they're made by CII to deliver projects. So they really have some blind spots, potential blind spots, when used that are used in circumstances that demand you to think outside the normal project delivery system. Remember, we said earlier that you have to be going across silos and boundaries. You have to be thinking about delivering the asset, not just about doing your job. So while you're using these tools, you should be thinking to yourself, what blind spots might these have? And did they actually address all the concerns of my scenario? But you never know. You know, your experience might end up building on the CII research and feeding back to CII and helping take that research in new directions. Gerry, you ready to go?
Oh, yes, sir.
Okay. I don't know if, yeah, that's great.
I'm popping buttons here, so I'm ready to go. All right, so let's recap what's been covered here. And at this moment, you know, we left time to be able to address questions and interact with the folks on the call here, or on the virtual call. So now's a good time. If you have a question, you might want to put it into the question box. So first thing is to recognize that transitions are unstable, they're unpredictable, there's hidden work, it's got various components to it. The one that you really want to look at is getting rid of the time that it takes to get decisions made. That's the one that you really want to hit after. And so in order to do this and make this work, coordination time has to go up. I mean, that's one of the elements that is really going to be an aid or a tool, is increasing your coordination time. There's 5 areas of project integration: the work processes, organization and team that are matched to the work, leadership governance, decision-making, communication, and information flows all support the matching of the organization to the work. And then finally, there's the ever-changing risk environment, and you have to address all 5. That's they come as a package, and you should think about them in that way. So you have to plan for that. Scenario planning, it's not forecasting. It's highly parallel. You're looking for multiple futures and working back from that, not just one set future. The soft stuff is hard. All 5 PIs have to be deliberately addressed at each transition. I wanted to add my own view of common pitfalls, just coming from where I do on the soft side, is what keeps us from doing scenario planning. And I have 3 things that I hear a lot. One is it's going to take a lot of time. We don't have time to do that. The second thing is it's too hard. We're going too far with this planning, and you know, perhaps in normal circumstances there may be a case for that. But in times when you're transitioning through a global pandemic and the kinds of things that can erupt and have erupted, you really need to get into it. And then the third thing is optimism bias. And that's really a killer, because people feel like they really know, they've got a lot of experience, they've been through this sort of thing before, or something they feel is roughly parallel. So to them, there's not really a need to do that. They have a lot of confidence in their thinking and their decisions, and that hurts us, as unfortunately, as often as it helps us in situations like this. So we've presented a set of ideas and some methods to think about and to go do. What's the punchline? What's the bonus here? The bonus is that you will walk through these processes and get to the other side, your leadership team will be better aware, better aligned. Your teams will be better aligned, better communicated with. You're going to find that there's a lot more confidence in your ability to plan and execute. That's going to result in more productivity and safer operations when you actually get into it. So I want to leave it there with the exception of one more time, CII has great tools and a lot of great resources to help you with scenario planning, as Mark just said. I won't repeat all of that, but I want to encourage everyone to really get into scenario planning and use the CII tools that can help you. Okay, any questions? Mike, anything there that we should be addressing?
Yes, we got some good questions here. Okay, talking of blind spots, are there criteria for setting the cone of vision for the scenario?
Could you repeat the question?
Or perhaps,
again?
Sure. Talking of blind spots, are there criteria for setting the cone of vision for the scenario?
Yeah. Yeah. Gerry and I both have opinions on this, but I'll go first. That's always an argument of how far forward do you do it? How broadly do you do it? And if you've participated in a risk workshop, you have seen people that say, well, what if there's a global pandemic? And then someone says, well, if we're going to go to that, then we may as well not do the risk workshop. That's, you're totally out of range. It's crazy. That's never going to happen. That's going to change everything. All bets are off. So yeah, my suggestion would be find about how far you can push it, and you want to be, I'd say, maybe 2 degrees of change from something directly identifiable. Let me tell you what I mean by that. If you said, okay, we can only worry about remobilizing to the chemical plant site, I don't have time to consider what it means to think about completions yet, you're probably making the cone too close. You probably have to think it all the way through to what does it mean to deliver the asset? How am I going to complete the asset? Because that's what the company cares about, is starting to make plastic or this. Now, I may have to get the other guys to worry about who we sell it to and all that. That'll have to come into the planning. But my advice is probably go one step further than you can actually see right to the horizon, and try and take it one step over the horizon.
I had a different perspective on it. Just I like to start these scenario planning processes with putting a frame in place and getting people to chip into that, to socialize that. So that allows us to put the bounding conditions, deliberately where we want them to be, and then work into that. So my thinking here is more procedural.
Well, that's a great question, though. Is one of the things that we do advocate in setting this up, and we didn't put it in because it's not a meeting, is actually chartering the team that's going to be on this. So you name names and you say, here's what they're going to be doing, and you set those boundaries. And that way the sponsoring executives can look at it and say, no, I need you to think broader, wider, further, nearer, or whatever, and they'll adjust that cone. Got more, Mike?
Okay, great. Yeah, I've got a question about the 5PI graphic. Is that intended as a flow chart or more of a visual?
I'd say it's more of a
slides.
visual. Yeah. Okay. So what actually happens? That's taken from a process mapping software and simulation software we have. It's proprietary software, and it describes the work process just like Primavera schedule and the flow of that. But it also connects to the organization. So it says who in the organization or what team is responsible for certain areas, and it allows you to actually measure hidden work. So the graphics that measure hidden work come out of that sort of a simulation. And it makes predictions about how organizing differently or doing the task differently can affect that hidden work, and it can actually be measured in the same way as job hours, just like direct work.
We got a request to show the slide with the 5 elements again.
I think I can do that. Did they want this one, I guess, or did they want?
I think No, I think
I'm
I think
sorry.
the table.
The matrix, yeah, the table.
Okay, the table. There we go. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Next question. Having the understanding that communication and procurement represent the most factors why projects fail, with today's business situation that has brought the focus spot on procurement, with the challenges we're facing, especially with keeping commitments or procurement suppliers keeping commitments, do you see a new norm of how we manage procurement activities? And will this help or worsen the possibility for projects to succeed?
That's a great question. Gerry, do you want? Well, procurement is everyone's favorite whipping boy, unfortunately, and
It is.
now, but they do a great service and a very important service. So now perhaps it's a time where they can redefine themselves, a little more strongly or better, because they really do a pretty good job, and they often get handed, all the bad stuff and blame for everything.
Right.
And most procurement organizations I've worked with in EPCs and stuff, they work their heads off and they do things. They're usually understaffed, under-resourced, and yeah. So I don't know if I answered the question more than just sentiment, but
I've already seen thinking around because the procurement organizations have been really hammered with get it when we need it, as we need it, as cheaply as possible. So the supply chain was spring-loaded to that. Now, of course, we're finding some of the sources are not going to be reliable for us. So it's not just in time; it's just in case. Do we have enough sources to get our fabricated modules, especially the way we're going with increasing modularization in the field, that we really have to have the number of places that are safe places. We can have the kind of confidence in our supply chain overall that we have to have.
I hope they redefine their role. I think that now's a chance to get a bigger bite at the apple.
Thanks. Gerry, got a question for you. If we want to think about this framework for processes outside the box, like oil exploration or drug research, what would you highlight about the scenario planning framework?
Right. I think the thing to do, I've seen some quality decision-making concepts that asked us to bring people in who have different thinking, different ideas. They come from different disciplines or even perhaps non-engineering disciplines, so that you're getting inputs from sources that are not necessarily inside of your own circle. So that's always a good approach to use. In your framing of it, include in the participants and the stakeholders, get these foreign bodies into the discussion so they can bring you fresh ideas. If you have somebody who's got a technology background or is in the technology world, they do some pretty radical thinking, consumer products and so on. If you have access to, and I guess one of the things is CII has got 5 sectors. So you probably have access to people who you can really grab hold of and say, hey, we're thinking about this in a certain way. And that could really help. I think Mark earlier said, well, if you got a chemical plant and you really want to do AWP, if you had somebody who's been working offshore, they really understand how to put work packages together, because there's not a laydown area. You got to get it there when you need it with the right skills and all of that business. So that would be my recommendation. That would be my answer.
Yeah, thanks. And scenario planning is used in those industries and in all kinds of strategic exercises. I mean, it's a great way to look, because you can't predict the future. So the best we can do is predict different versions of what the future might look like.
It didn't start with projects, though. It started with business failures. That's what really generated it. So, I mean, it's a cool thing to know the source of scenario planning came from business, because
when you're betting the business, I believe,
when
Gerry.
you're betting the business, right?
Yeah, how about that?
Yeah.
Hey, Mark,
Yes.
what is your commentary about the willingness and capability of current project leaders, owners and service companies to guide teams through this transition?
Well, you know, our experience of that is they're trying their best, but they've been a little more silent and stayed kind of traditional. So, you know, they're trying to continue to lead the team from a different location using fairly traditional tools. And what ends up happening is some of the people who are out on the job sites and places like that say, well, I get a PDF, but I can't get it. I get it on my phone. I can't see it on my computer, whatever. So the communication, these leaders really need to say, this is different. I got to step it up. I got to be communicating with these guys every other day. You know, the drumbeat gives them confidence that it's safe to come back to work. I've got to be telling them that it's safe, that we're looking after them. And I just feel like you've got a lot of capability out there, but some of them need to step it up on the communication side and really start to lead. So when those people are showing up at the job sites, so when those people are home, they feel included. And, you know, many of these guys say, oh, we've worked remote before. I've done jobs in Africa or Australia or whatever, offshore. But when you can't see people, they typically go native or go rogue. So you really got to step it up and be inclusive about it and step up the communication.
Gerry, this participant says gaining alignment is often a challenge. How will we drive aligned work in the new normal?
I'm gonna be a politician here for a minute and go back to the question that Mark answered to say, I think that from what I hear in the industry, that there's been an under communication of what companies are doing to create safe workspaces and what's going on and that sort of thing. And that's kind of causing people, I think, to turn from, hey, maybe I don't want to do this, or so. I think that's going to be a problem. And that doesn't, you know, it's not the project manager or the project engineer. I mean, they can do what they can do, but that's really, you know, through the executive ranks, the companies need to be doing more, saying more, getting out there and communicating with these people where they are and how they take communications to give them better confidence. Hit me with that question again.
Okay, gaining alignment is often a challenge. How will we drive aligned work in the new normal?
Well, I think the process of stepping through, like scenario planning, for example, having the right people in the room, that is an aligning activity. That is, you know, by its very nature, getting people to say, yes, I agree, no, I don't, a little left or right. And in that process, kind of reestablishing them. Now, you don't have the same tools. You know, you're not going to go to the Hilton or the Marriott and go run a meeting to do this. So you have to figure out, you know, we're seeing ourselves. We're doing work now that's virtual. We're providing consulting services, you know, using the technology tools that are available to us. That's how you're going to drive the alignment using those same tools. And I will tell you that you do lose a bit, but it's way better than not going through the process, not taking people through it, and you find yourself getting better and better at it as you go. So I would encourage, get in, use the tools that are here, run these meetings virtually, and you know, take the extra steps that you need. Be ultra prepared when you go into the meeting, so there's no question about what are we here for. People are not going to be on a Zoom call or a GoToMeeting for 2 hours or 5 hours. They'll last, 2 hours at most. 90 minutes probably is what you should plan for. So these different techniques are, how you should be working.
If I might just briefly add, we're out of time, but CII has great, alignment is one of the CII best practices. They've got some great tools. A lot of that stuff can still be used under the current circumstances. It just has to be changed to a little more of an electronic format, and you got to put in the calories. Alignment's hard to come by. You just got to put in the calories.
All right. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you very much, Gerry. Thank you, Mark. We really appreciate you guys, your time today. And to the audience, we thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate your time. Hope you enjoyed the webinar. Don't forget to check out our events page to sign up for future webinars. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.